Hi everyone, it's a late night here in Sydney at the moment, but it's great to be here. Thank you for the opportunity to talk. I'm Mike Quilling, the founder of Where'd You Go and Hemisphere Digital, and I'm going to be here talking to you about data and technology. And we have a panel discussion at the end of this presentation. So we'll allow you to unmute yourselves and ask directly questions to that panel. Before we get into the presentation though, I'd like to thank Embratur for sponsoring this session, and would like to play a short video about Brazil's natural heritage.
Hello and welcome to Brazil. We are very pleased to have you here today. In this year's Adventure Travel World Summit organized by ATTA, we are going to show you the Brazilian national parks. We could spend several days here talking about our 74 parks and natural attractions. After all, we have the greatest biodiversity on the planet. We have chosen 5 national parks to show you, one in each region of Brazil. Let's start with Tijuca National Park. It is located in one of the main destinations of Brazil, the wonderful city of Rio de Janeiro. To get to Rio de Janeiro, there are non-stop international flights to Galeão Airport. As for domestic flights, there is also the option to fly into Santos Dumont Airport. There are several roads and trails around the park. In order to see the famous Christ the Redeemer statue and appreciate the spectacular view from Corcovado Mountain, visitors can take the REC Railway, which goes all the way to the summit. In addition to the park, tourists can enjoy several other attractions around the city. After all, Rio is home to great natural and cultural wonders. The city offers ample lodging options that meet the highest international standards. Now we turn to the famous Iguaçu Falls, which are located inside the national park. To get to the falls, you will need to fly into Foz do Iguaçu International Airport. Visitors will have a unique experience when they see the spectacular force of nature. In addition to the falls, there are many other options of adventure in the area. On the Macuco boat safari, for example, visitors get really close to the falls and will certainly get splashed by the falling waters. It's awesome. Now it's time to talk about Fernando de Noronha National Marine Park, where visitors literally dive into a fascinating world. In order to get to the island of Fernando de Noronha, there are daily flights from Recife and from Natal. This paradise has several beaches with emerald green waters, including Sancho Bay, voted the most beautiful beach in South America on TripAdvisor. In Fernando de Noronha, it's possible to go on boat rides and to go scuba diving to see dolphins, colorful fish, sea turtles, and several different marine species up close. Now we turn to the national park located in the heart of the largest rainforest in the world, the Amazon. I'm talking about Anavilhanas. It is the second largest river archipelago in the world, containing 400 islands, several lakes, rivers, as well as impressive wildlife and vegetation. To get to Anavilhanas, you need to catch a flight to Manaus Airport. From there is a boat to Novo Airão. Alternatively, you can drive there. You will be able to see the pink river dolphin, go on boat rides, swim in the beautiful waters of Rio Negro, and visit riverside communities. Finally, let's take a look at Chapada dos Veadeiros National Park, located in the Brazilian Cerrado. It's home to beautiful waterfalls, natural pools, and amazing rock formations. To get to the park, you will need to fly into Brasília and then drive to the cities of São Jorge and Alto Paraíso. And everything that was said here is just a demonstration. Many other parks in Brazil have beautiful settings and lush nature. The Responsible Tourism seal has been created for hotels, restaurants, and other attractions to help fight the dissemination of the coronavirus. Thank you very much for attending our session. We invite you to visit us at our booth, and we will be delighted to show you many other destinations in our country.
Thank you, Alisson. That brings back great memories, and I hope that we'll all have the opportunity to explore Brazil again soon. The Road Less Travelled by Robert Frost tells us about choosing an alternative path. And whilst that path may have challenges and obstacles along the way, ultimately, when we look back, being comfortable that we've made the right choice is the most important thing of all. I think that this is particularly important right now, and particularly relevant, seeing as we're faced with such an uncertain future for tourism and society in general. The paths we choose right now are even more important than ever. I'm Mike Welling. I'm the founder of Wedgigo and Hemisphere Digital, and I'm here to talk to you about data and technology and how it can benefit tourism. But I'm also here to share with you my story and some of the paths I've chosen to get here today. I'm not generally a believer in coincidences, but when Alice told me that Embratur was sponsoring this particular session, the only word that came to mind was serendipity. I'll explain further. 25 years ago, I lived here. It's a little place in the northeast of Brazil, and I was a biologist working in a small region called the Caatinga. I was working for the Museum of American Man Foundation, and I was studying in the Serra de Capivara National Park, which is a very similar area to what you just saw there around the Chapada de ATWS. It's a World Heritage listed area, and it's globally renowned for its dramatic landscapes and rock art, which date back from 50,000 years ago. It's a very impressive place of the world, and if you have a chance to go, I'd highly recommend it. This was me working with local guides and establishing a ranger training program 25 years ago. I spent 2 years there with a GPS and some basic maps and collected as much data as I could about everything we possibly could imagine. So we mapped watercourses, we mapped fauna and flora, we even mapped all of the cultural sites. We used all of this data to create a multi-layered map of a national park and then used this data to determine areas which we used for conservation, ecotourism, and community-led cultural programs. It was a fascinating time. I was a young, naive scientist, and what I discovered really wasn't very scientific at all. What I discovered actually came from the fact that while I was studying biology and collecting data, it was useful in conserving wild areas, but it's not enough. And in order for you to have any effective conservation program, you need buy-in from all stakeholders. And so in this particular area, we had great collaboration between private sector, the community, government sector and NGOs. And we had this common sense of purpose, and everyone was deeply invested in the outcome. And so that for me was an inspirational moment where I came to a realization that science is not alone good enough to preserve our natural areas. You need this sense of collaboration, and you need all parties to be involved. But lastly, data is really critical for this, because any form of conservation program, in order for you to track and monitor its success, you need effective measures in order to track its progress. Fast forward 20 years, and ultimately my path didn't stay in the natural resources sector. I've spent the last 20 years working with data and technology across a whole range of different sectors, ranging from media, from telecommunications, financial services. And I've seen a huge amount of disruption that data and technology has brought to those industries over the last 20 years. This digital disruption can have a significant impact, but unfortunately, not all of those technologically innovations have got great positive social outcomes, unfortunately. And so even though we live in this technologically advanced society, I believe that we've become very disconnected from our natural world. And as a result of our disconnection with the natural world, I believe this has been contributing quite substantially to our kind of lack of social concern, and has it resulted some of the mass tourism pressures or unsustainable tourism pressures that we're seeing in the industry today. So I saw firsthand evidence of this when I was training as a tourism guide in the national parks here in Sydney in Blue Mountains. And I was also doing some work as a vertical rescue operator. And I saw firsthand what could happen when somebody armed with a GoPro went out into a wilderness area completely unprepared and with complete and utter disregard for the consequences and the impact that would have with the adventure community in general. And so just because technology and data exists, it doesn't mean that it's necessarily always used in the best possible way for a best social outcome. So about 5 years ago, I'd actually got to the point in my career where I was a little bit disenchanted with working with those industries and decided that, why not? I love adventure tourism. I love the natural resources sector. So why not do something? So I set up this company called Where'd You Go? The name is Where'd You Go? Where'd you go on the weekend? And at its core, we were looking to see if we could create a community of like-minded individuals that shared a common passion for adventure and a common passion to get out there into wilderness areas. But also at the heart of this was the need to establish this sense of camaraderie and this sense that, if we could use data which we're generating as a community, could that data be used for social good? And could it be shared with governments? Could it be shared with private sectors to ensure that we could establish a program which kept those wilderness areas preserved for future generations? And so we established Where'd You Go 5 years ago with this principle in mind. Collect data from a community that share a common passion, share data with non-government organisations and organisations so that they can create evidence-based policy around it, and then give that same information to the private sector so they can establish more relevant destination experiences which are more attractive to the adventure community. It was a pretty big task in hand. And then luckily, about 2 years ago, we came across this innovation program, which was being run by the Australian government. The Australian government has an organisation within called Austrade, which is principally there for ensuring investment into Australia and to ensure that Australia has an export market for innovation. But government's very tricky to work with. And so occasionally they put out these challenges, which are there to encourage small businesses like ourselves in order to work with government to solve global or big social challenges. And at the time, the Australian government had just come out of its 2020 tourism strategy and was looking now to plan for its 2030 growth and needed data to support that growth strategy. And the traditional forms of data which it had available to it through market research surveys, such as the National Visitor Survey and the International Visitor Survey, didn't really capture the emerging trends which were happening in the tourism industry. And they looked to businesses such as ourselves to fill the gap by creating an innovation around intelligent data to transform tourism delivery. So we took the opportunity, and this is a little bit of a cheeky slide, but it's meant to illustrate what we feel and what our company's values are in respect to technology and innovation. So when we saw the brief from Austrade and what its outcome was attempting to achieve, which was really around understanding economic growth and how it can grow its tourism footprint, principally from Southeast Asian markets, we took the opportunity to say, well, maybe you should consider a more holistic view of tourism. Maybe we should start to think about the social and economic and the environmental impacts that tourism has. And maybe we can put longer term policies in place to ensure that it does have a sustainable future, rather than focusing on the short term. And this for us as a business is what we really aspire to be. And so I cheekily say here, does the world really need another billionaire in space? Probably not. The path which we choose right now to achieve a more sustainable future, let's use this technology, let's use this innovation and the data we have available to us, and let's really make a difference and determine progress by making sustainable practices in place that benefit people, the planet, and use profits to reinvest back into the industry. And so that was our response to the brief. And we won a very big grant. We won $1 million grant from the Australian government to build out this innovation program of work. It's not very often in your career, but you get a massive grant from government to really help you make a difference. And so what we've done over the last year and a half is to establish a platform, a data analytics platform, which has been designed to support the tourism industry as it goes into a fairly difficult era and a difficult time ahead. And we felt that we needed to provide the industry with as much information as possible in order to be profitable and sustainable going forward. And so the two areas that we really felt we needed to address was, one, these holistic measures of tourism kind of metrics, so covering environment, societal measures, and economic impacts of tourism. But also, right now, small businesses really need access to as much help as they can. And so the technology barriers which exist for a small business to access data and insights and to be able to action them into some form of change or some form of response to the current environment is incredibly difficult. So we have the opportunity right now through this platform to give all of government, all of industry and small businesses access to data and insights to help them on their recovery efforts. So we've launched this platform called Hemisphere. It's a pretty sophisticated bit of technology. It's a geospatial analytics platform, but we prefer to call it the People and Places platform. And really what it's there for is to provide ready-made, accessible insights around how people move, how they interact with the world around them, what do they spend money on, and what are their tourism impacts. And we want to provide that to all of industry, from large government right down to small businesses at an affordable price. But more importantly, we are very much a purpose-driven and social outcome-focused business, and we believe that this is how technology innovation should operate in the future. So what about our path that we've chosen to sustainable outcomes? So there are 4 principles that we're working towards, and I'm going to open this up to the panel discussion at the end of the presentation. And the reason why we have the 2 speakers alongside us, we have Cameron Crowe from Leave No Trace, who founded Leave No Trace Australia, and is very much aware of the impact that data and technology can have when seeking to find measures for environmental impacts and to put sustainability at its forefront. We also have Rob Taylor from the Western Australian Indigenous Tourism Operators Council, and we're working quite closely with Rob in order to provide his group access to data, technology, insights to help Indigenous businesses grow and proliferate in an uncertain time. So our 4 driving principles behind this platform are really, one is to provide fair and accessible data to enterprise right down to small business. We want to establish sharing data in an open and transparent way. And if you've been aware of what's been happening in the world today around all of the big technology giants and the trouble they're getting into with inappropriate data sharing, this is less about privacy and more around ethics and making sure that data can be used for social good and it's delivered to those who would benefit most. And that's a principle that we hold dear. As I mentioned, we also want to equip First Nation peoples with the tools and technology to be competitive and reduce the inequality gap. And we want to use the profits from this entity and reinvest that back into minimising environmental impacts and to support responsible tourism education through the Leave No Trace programme of work. So what does Hemisphere do specifically for the tourism industry and the adventure tourism industry in general? So some of the things which we've been working on, this is by no means the only thing we do, but it's just to give you a taste of what this platform can do. So first thing first, everyone who's been on a mountain bike or been walking or hiking in the area, have you ever wondered, and has the government ever wondered, what has the impact that had on the local community? When people go using their mountain bikes, they go visit local areas, they spend money in those areas, they help small businesses. And by being able to quantify the impact that adventure tourism has on local communities, we hope that this will enable policies to be made to encourage further growth of those types of activities. Biosecurity is something which most people are not really aware of and what their impact is to the natural world around them. We're in the middle of a COVID-19 pandemic. It couldn't be the biggest biosecurity scare there is. But recently I was traveling to New Zealand. I was exposed to Didimo in waterways. We've got Karen, who's very close to this in Western Australia, where we have Phytophthora or dieback, which is killing off large portions of native wildflowers, which is one of the biodiversity hotspots of the world. And the more and more we travel into remote areas, the more and more we carry those risks. And so by being able to monitor people's exposure into those biodiversity prone areas, we can provide information to land managers so they can help mitigate those risks more effectively. We're also enabling tourism recovery. And as I mentioned, governments have been doing a great job with their stimulus packages and by helping tourism businesses carry the weight of COVID. However, to aid recovery, you need access to data and insight. So who are people traveling areas, where are they going to, what are they spending on, what are the types of experiences they're wanting to use? And so providing that level of detail and insights to small businesses, we help will fast track the recovery and effort, particularly with the small tourism operators. And lastly, I mentioned here, the role that Indigenous tourism has. And we all know that people are seeking more authentic experiences now. People are really tired. They're really tired of COVID. They're really tired of lockdowns. This whole change that we're seeing in the world at the moment as people move from being more aware of their place on the planet. And Indigenous tourism is in a perfect place to capitalise on this growth and this need. But they really haven't had the tools, the capacity, the skills, or the finances to be able to compete on the global tech stage. And so we are hoping that we are providing access to data and insights, which is going to help grow that industry. So this is the end of the presentation. I hope that you've enjoyed the theme. We'd love for you to join us on the road less travelled, and we think that we're making a significant difference to establishing ourselves for a sustainable tourism future. We're now going to open up the panel discussion, and as I mentioned here, we've got three people. There's myself, I'm the founder of Where'd You Go in Hemisphere, Cameron Crowe, who's the founder of Leave No Trace Australia, and we have Robert Taylor, who's the CEO of Western Australian Tourism Indigenous Operators Council. So thank you, and be happy to take any questions.
We have some, hello everyone, this is Gergana from ATTA. We have some questions coming from the audience, and yes, Amber, thank you. Thank you very much, Mike. Great presentation, really useful information, and it is amazing what you do, and together with Cameron and Robert. Some questions are coming first to the chat, and I would like to invite everyone to be also requesting to be unmuted, and you can direct your questions directly. The first one, do you think that impact reports will become the norm for companies overtaking mere finance reports?
So I would hope so. I think part of the challenge is that a lot of the measures which are needed to track and fully understand the impacts that tourism have not been available to date. And that was part of a challenge which was issued with this government grant that we spoke about. And it's fairly straightforward to look at tourism satellite accounts, look at economic GDP indicators at a very macro level, and you've got very clear indicators of how much tourism contributes to the economy, the global economy. But what does it mean for on-the-ground local area reporting? What is the immediate impact to local communities? And how do we balance the economic returns of attracting large numbers of people into an area, but also not create community dissatisfaction, sentiment, and environmental degradation? So I would hope that government would encourage and private sector would adopt new forms of measurement so that they could fully understand the impact that they're having, not just economically, but also societally and environmentally.
So Mike,
I was just going to add to that as well. Oh, you go first, Cameron.
Thanks, Robert. Cheers. So a couple of other elements with regard to that question. Deloitte's recently did a study and put out a paper that addressed the issue for corporates and their social and their responsibilities and their corporate governance. And basically, they were stating that even at a board level for corporates, that the world's biodiversity is under such pressure that board directors of companies now in a position where they need to be able to measure and report on their impacts on biodiversity. I don't think it's well known that the world's biomass, so the total mass of life on Earth, has diminished by 60% since 1970. And so this pressure that's escalating is the key focus for the United Nations Biodiversity Conference that's coming up in China in next month. So it's been delayed twice because of COVID, but in some ways, COVID's a distraction. Climate change is the big challenge that's, in all the headlines, but significantly, biodiversity is the other really substantial challenge that's facing the world. So a measure of that is that the United Nations recently put out, for the first time, 2 different departments of the United Nations, the department dealing with climate change and the department dealing with biodiversity, put out a joint statement saying that these 2 factors are intrinsically linked and require immediate and significant attention. So it's definitely on the agenda, both measuring and reporting on impacts on nature. I guess in the hemisphere world and Wedgigo, in a small way, what we've been doing is mapping the occurrence of Phytophthora cinnamoni. So Phytophthora is the dieback disease in in the southwest of Western Australia. We have incredible diversity of plants in the southwest of Western Australia and a very, very high degree of endemism. So in some places, there are only a handful of plants in existence. And so what we're looking at is measuring people flow across the landscape and then overlaying that against where these very high value biodiversity assets are, and looking to manage the allocation of resources and potentially, influence the flow of people in the landscape to minimize the impacts on those biodiversity assets. So I can only see, that great hope in technology such as what's been developed by Hemisphere in enabling us to manage those assets and our impacts on that much more clearly and much more precisely in the landscape. And I have no doubt that technology is going to get much sharper in giving us the tools we need to do that when we're out in the adventuring.
Yeah, I was just going to add to the, Aboriginal tourism in Australia is very way behind the 8 ball when it comes to data. In fact, there's hardly any measurements at all that we can call on, which will support some of these findings that were coming out now with these new platforms coming online, because a lot of Aboriginal tourism businesses are not online even for bookings, just due to the fact that a lot of the owners of the businesses are elders that don't really understand the digital platforms that are really opening up. So it's very difficult at the moment in Australia to find any data on Aboriginal tourism. I mean, WATOC has been around for 20 years and it still hasn't really got a huge connection into that area. So this data is going to be very valuable for Aboriginal tourism as it grows across Australia into the future. So really looking forward to working on it more. And during COVID, it's even shown it more, being that most of our Aboriginal tourism businesses haven't even been able to open due to they are in biodiversity zones, which were closed down by the government. So it's been a tough journey through this period. So the data and analytics coming forward is going to be very important for us to get out of what we're in now.
Great. Thank you for all the answers. And wow, the numbers that Cameron shared are really sad to hear, but at least now with technology, there's some hope. The second question from Carlos is, do you think that the impact reports, so this is building on his first question, do you think that will happen via notion of the benefits, or being a purpose driven, or by law?
It's a tricky question, really. I mean, every country and every world is slightly different in its interpretation. Now, by law, I think would probably be very tricky. Some of the larger impacts that we've been talking about and some of the things that Cameron has been talking about, potentially they will be policies in place to encourage more sustainable business practice. But whether it becomes law and a mandatory requirement to report on that, it'd be very tricky. mostly because of the accessibility of the data and accessibility of the insights and the availability for businesses to action on that. So it's a tricky area. In terms of should it be purpose-driven, I suspect that we're all here in the same room because we all share common values around this industry. And so we all know that the tourism industry, in particular the adventure tourism industry, needs to adopt certain principles around sustainability, otherwise it won't have a future. And we've seen the impacts that COVID has, short-term impacts, massive financial and economic impacts to an entire industry, just for a result of one leak of a pathogen, a human pathogen in this case here. But it's just showing you how fragile a single event can be unless we think more sustainably about that. So I would imagine, and I would hope, that businesses that had information and data available to them to help themselves be more sustainable, that's ultimately going to help them financially in the end goal and make their future more sustainable.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's a combination. One of the principles of Leave No Trace is around stewardship and it's a skills and ethics program. So there's the practical skills that's required to minimise impacts, but probably more importantly is the ethical side of it and people's personal acceptance of responsibility and how and when they apply those skills when nobody's watching. So I think there are even issues where we should choose not to go to different places because maybe the risks and the impacts outweigh any personal value we might have out of that. I think in terms of laws, I think that, we've had, 40 years or more of, the philosophy of unbridled capitalism, that's come from, the two big statements were Ronald Reagan saying that, the government is not the solution, the government is the problem. And I think that what COVID's really, shown us is that no, government is really critical to our place in the world and our ability to manage very challenging situations. And, Margaret Thatcher's comment that there is no such thing as society. And what we've learnt recently is that we are a society and we all need to cooperate and work together to face and overcome the challenges, the major challenges that the planet's facing at the moment. So I think that there is definitely, that personal ethic that is going to need to come to the fore. But at some point, it's like the carbon, emitting carbon, there will be laws, and those laws will inevitably drive us into a much more sustainable and stable position than the dynamic that's been in play over the last 40 years.
Thank you. Robert, do you have anything to add?
No, I think it'll be definitely purpose driven. I don't see governments, or at least in Australia, being able to force these sorts of things on us. But definitely need to be using these sorts of platforms and data analytics to help drive us forward, especially in the First Nations area, because our regions are quite vast, especially in WA, and finding out information and being able to support the Aboriginal people on their country is very important to us, and making sure that, as Cameron was pointing out, that our country is actually grown a lot healthier during this period, because we haven't had as many people on country in some places where they probably shouldn't go due to our cultural laws, which don't really match the white persons or non-Indigenous laws. So there's a lot of crossover there that we have found through, the pandemic that is really, being seen more now than ever.
One element, Robert, that's been really interesting is that as there is more and more authority given to traditional owners to manage country, as they get responsibility and title handed back to their country, is the structure of permits. And so I guess that's an example of regulations coming into place where where there is improved capacity to manage people and where and how many can go at what times in the landscape?
Yes, for sure. And I think it's quite, I find it quite humorous that people get upset now that suddenly Aboriginal people are wanting to charge people to come onto their country in areas, that they are now starting to be able to manage when, parks and wildlife have been charging people for years. So it is an interesting landscape moving forward. And I think it really does need, as we've been discussing ourselves, a platform that everyone can get onto that's common rather than having a lot of different charging, platforms and things to drive that forward. So it's interesting coming forward.
Thank you very much. The next question is, do you think that the amount of different data that would come from reporting different KPIs, not only financial, are key to really change tourism, and how?
So I think I'll start that one off. So I think the important thing to think about data here is it's not just really about KPIs. So, how would a tourism business measure its success? I would imagine it would be, number of tours, number of people visiting, financial impacts, and what's the impact to my business per se. But what if sentiment was more important? So what do people say about your particular tours and activities? Also, why do people travel to your region? What makes this specific tourism activity attractive for this type of traveller in that particular region? So the data which we're capturing in the platform doesn't necessarily just have to be reporting KPIs. It can actually be used for informing the actual product development as well, and making sure that you're competitive in terms of what your audience are really looking for in that type of experience. And as I mentioned, this is kind of what we're seeing as a trend, is that, if you don't have information around what people are really wanting, and you're only capturing the information from market research surveys, you're limited to the information you can capture in the length of a questionnaire. Whereas you can use alternative forms of data, social media data, scraping, mobile analytics, expenditure data from banks. There's a whole range of different data sets out there. And when you bring it all together in a platform, and you remove the technical barriers, and you remove the privacy issues, and you remove all of this social aspects around should you or should not be using that, you end up with very rich information around intent and why people are doing it. And that is very powerful, because ultimately it tells you how you can determine how your product is going to be more attractive, but also use the data to understand its impact on the local community and the environment and financial impacts as well.
And I think for Aboriginal tourism in Australia as well, we haven't really understood how to measure the social impact as well. So it's not just about the financial impact. It's also learning what are the impacts on community when there's tourists visiting there. When there's people that are unemployed at the moment suddenly get jobs. So this whole impact on their mental health improvement, their physical improvement, because they're doing a job that they love doing. So there's a lot of measurements that aren't being measured at the moment, that we hope that through these analytics we can start getting some of those measures in place, because government, as much as they like to see the return on investment through the gross revenues and state incomes, they definitely still like to see what are those social returns, and there isn't a lot of measurement on that at the moment. So that'll be something we'd really like to focus on going forward as well, the social impact.
Thank you. And the next question is coming from Sondes. Is this an application platform currently only available in Australia, or is there a plan to make it available on a global basis?
Yeah, I think it's launched in Australia, mostly because of that's where we're from, and also current travel restrictions make it quite tricky to get overseas, but there is plan to roll this out globally. We're in the process of the next market, which is New Zealand. So we have a lot of data based in New Zealand. We've got a lot of interest in other markets. Really, the platform is, it doesn't really matter which geography you exist in. It's really the availability of data that determines what can be used in each geography. So mobile phone coverage, for example, we're using mobility data. We're working with some global mobility data providers. So the large markets are available. Transaction data, which we have in the system, again, we've been working with some big global financial institutions, and we have consistent data available to us in other markets. But really, it's about, for us, where we are right now as a business, it's incredibly difficult for us to scale internationally. But we're very interested in seeing how we can get this as a global platform. We actually have been in quite early stage discussions with the World Bank and the IFC, and we've had some initial interest in seeing how that could be used as a model to fund the rollout of this platform into some of the developing markets as well. So the longer term intent is that this will be a global platform, but we really have to rely on globally available data sets, local available data sets, and the ability to travel, which is a little bit of a restriction at the moment.
WATOC is also working with the World Indigenous Tourism Alliance, or WINTA, which some of you may be aware of. So we'll be definitely, once we get our pilot up running with in Australia, we'll definitely be sharing that information through another conference that we'll be hosting in 2023 called the World Indigenous Tourism Summit here in Perth. So we're definitely working towards, working with Mike and Cameron on growing this internationally as well through those avenues.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Okay, I don't currently see any questions coming in the chat, but if anyone is interested to unmute yourself, feel free to do so, to have a question. Okay, another question is coming in the chat. For small tour operator businesses, this is expensive for accessing the data. Will there be a way for small business to simply access some reports without a full monthly subscription?
So you would have seen the slide, which was one of our outcomes, is to enable all of government right down to small business access to data at an affordable price. Now, without going into too much technical details, the innovation that we've brought in this platform is effectively an automation. So by taking a single file or a single set of data, we can redistribute that information to hundreds and hundreds of thousands of businesses pretty much with a click of a button. And so the cost of accessing, translating, going through privacy, going through all of the risk mitigation exercises you need to when you're dealing with these large data sets has gone away largely. And so the intent would be that we're going to create this pay-as-you-go subscription model where you can effectively only pay for what you want to use, rather than being locked into long-term contracts, rather than thinking about multi-year deals or expensive data sets that you may never use. The idea is that this is literally going to be a click pay-as-you-go self-serve model. Now, where we are at the moment is that we've had to focus on slightly larger end of town because we're a small business as well. And so we need to fund the continued development and the R&D of this program of work. But the next phase, and there will be some exciting announcements over the next couple of weeks, where we are introducing a specific small business product specifically aligned to some of the government program work around small business recovery right now. So hopefully that answers your question. But right now, not immediately available, but very short term in the future, yes, a pay-as-you-go, low-cost subscription model specifically designed for small businesses.
And I was going to say, as a peak tourism body in Western Australia, we'd hope that we'll be able to provide that data for our smaller businesses as they need it as well. So it'll definitely be something that I think if once this goes wider for those peak bodies to be able to share some of the data. I mean, obviously, depending on what it's needed for. I mean, a lot of small businesses need data to get funding grants and things to help them, prove those the figures and statistics that are coming through. So I think that's something that also should probably happen.
Yeah, it's a good point, Rob. The ability for, in Australia, there's been a lot of these stimulus grants and packages which say, there's money available if you can prove that there's an economic or financial benefit from creating an activity. But if you don't have any data, and particularly remote areas or small towns where you're reliant on data which is produced every 6 months, which covers a very, very large tourism region and only really covers niche, well, it doesn't cover niche products at all. You're limited in terms of your ability to put forward a business case for growth. And so the definite social benefit from this is by having more granular data, having more specific types of use cases or specific types of applications, that data can definitely fulfill the need for data to promote, basically business cases for growth opportunity.
Yeah, and I mean, we've got KPIs put on us by state government that they can't answer and they expect us to. So, it's quite funny that. So it's definitely we need to use this data for our own purposes as well.
Thank you, and definitely I can wish you good luck with that plan, and definitely it will be, of course, beneficial for you, but also it looks like for the global community. The next question is coming from Tani, and it is directed to Robert. So you mentioned that some traditional owners are not as digitally savvy in Western Australia. So how do you support their journey to become more digitally literate and thereby gather data?
Yes, so I guess in Western Australia, because we're the peak body in Aboriginal tourism in WA, we run some mentoring programs and development programs. And the one that we're running at the moment is called the Aboriginal Tourism Academy. So with this, each business gets a mentor, which works with them for around 60 to 80 hours in a financial year, helping them develop their business. So anything, basically doing a business diagnostic with the business owner, working out what their needs are, and then supporting them in creating an action plan, which that action plan is then used with some funding attached to it to actually support them to get their businesses through from emerging to market ready to export ready. So obviously when you're getting up into that market ready, export ready is where you are getting more into that digital and internet-based booking systems, which a lot of them don't have at the moment. So this doesn't happen right across Australia. WA is lucky that WATOC has been here since 2002, but it's taken a long time to get the government to realise that we're a necessity for Aboriginal tourism in Western Australia. And even now we're getting other states in Australia starting to realise that they need a WATOC model in their state. So New South Wales, where Mike is, has a new organisation, probably about 4 or 5 years old now, the New South Wales Aboriginal Tourism Operators Council, and Queensland are talking about launching one in November this year as well. So it's very important. I think that now's the time we need to really start developing small business, and Aboriginal tourism businesses is what WATOC's remit is. Hope that answers that.
Yeah. So Rob, so it's true that there are challenges in data in the digital space, I think more in the commercial sector rather than in terms of a skill set. I mean, young Aboriginal people are very digitally savvy, and it's absolutely the main way of communicating, isn't it, across remote Australia?
Definitely. Problem is that not a lot of young people are tourism operators because the elders are the ones that share the stories, not the youth. So the youth are there learning and teaching, I guess, because the elders, they are scared of this digital age that's upon them now because they're not used to it. So they rely on the youth coming through to teach them how to use it. So it's an interesting thing that, the youth aren't just learning from their elders, but also training them.
Yeah. And so it's only recently that through native title settlements that traditional owner communities have actually begun to have an avenue to engage in the commercial world in their own terms. And so that's the beginning of a journey, and, the application of data and, digital capability in a commercial sphere has basically been limited by that access and to participation in commercial life in Australia rather than native digital skills in itself.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one of the things I always remind governments when they wonder why Aboriginal people are always needing extra support is that, it was only, I think it was in 1967 where the referendum vote that Aboriginal people in Australia, who were the First Nations people here, were actually recognised as people, because before that they were recognised as flora and fauna, and they couldn't own a business. So an important thing to remember too in Australia, and I'm sure in other First Nations cultures, is that there is no intergenerational wealth for Aboriginal people. There's no, businesses that were owned by their family members down the road that they can hand over or hand on and train in. So it's like we're starting from scratch. So it's a longer journey than our non-Indigenous friends.
Thank you for your comments. And Katie commented, she's the one who also asked about the pricing, and she comments that the tech challenge is the back end, bookings, payments, metrics, etc., connecting it all. Support is out there, and she would love to help tech Indigenous youth to be adventure tech experts. So feel free to follow up with her directly after that.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that is one of the things that WATOC has been, supporting through its Aboriginal Tourism Academy and development programs it's been running for the last 10 years, is that gap. Because, again, Aboriginal people love to do their storytelling, walk on country, take people safely around their country, but then understanding and being able to do the back end and office work at the same time, as all small businesses need to, has been the difficulty. So that's where WATOC is about to launch a new product or support in WA, and it's going to be a business hub, which will help support that specific back end and office work and accounting and all those sorts of things that they need to, bookkeeping, etc. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes as well. But happy to connect. That'll be awesome.
Wonderful. We have several more minutes for one or two more questions. Feel free to unmute, to request to be unmuted, or to send them over to the chat. So far, we don't have anyone with any additional questions. Do you have any words for wrap up, Mike?
Yes, definitely. And I think just a quick thank you to everyone for the opportunity to present. I think it's a pretty exciting time to be in the tourism industry. I think the future ahead looks good. I think even though all of the the world's been for a significant disruption, I generally get the sense that we're on this cusp of changing, and hence the theme, choosing the right path. And I think there's a more sustainable future out there, and the world will be a better place. We're playing our part, and we'd be loving to working with the adventure community to play our part as well. So really appreciate the opportunity to present Hemisphere and Where'd You Go. And again, thanks to Cameron and Rob for your participation in the panel. Really appreciate it. It is late at night, so we're going to crash now and start the fresh day tomorrow, but really appreciate it. And thanks for organising.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Cameron. Thank you, Rob. I'm also turning my video on so that everyone sees that I'm also here and alive. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for staying up at right now almost 2 a.m. For you, Mike, really appreciate all the insights and the information about your exciting platform. Enjoy everyone the rest of the summit, and looking forward to staying in touch with everyone.